This week we're going to be talking about infections, and so we might as well start out with infectious agents. A few definitions. The definition of a pathogen is any organism that can cause disease. Patho means disease, gen means to give rise to, as in Genesis. So a pathogen gives rise to disease. There's 5 different types of organisms that uh, can give disease. There are prions, viruses, bacteria, fungi, and parasites. Um, so you can have a parasitic infection, you can have, you know, viral infection, that kind of thing. They all behave differently, and they're all very different organisms. So the first one we're going to talk about is rare, but it gets a lot of news, like rare things tend to. It's called a prion. Now, prions, there's a debate if it's even an organism. It seems to be just a self-replicating protein. Um, there's there's no DNA, there's no RNA. Uh, they don't have any metabolism. Uh, they don't become inactive even at cooking temperatures. They don't even quite know what they are. Um, they do know that when you get infected with it, it inhabits the brain and spinal cord, the central nervous system. Um, they're responsible for mad cow disease. That's what's getting the most press right now. Uh, they also cause something called Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease and another one called Kuru. Those are the only 3 diseases that are identified as being involved with prions. And and when tissue is contaminated with prions, like say beef, um, then you can get it, and it makes the central nervous system not work properly. Um, Now, interestingly enough, mad cow disease has come to the attention and has really kind of developed since uh, feedlots and overcrowding. And they feed these beef cattle high protein feed to try and make them make more meat in a given amount of time. And so they use animal byproducts, and they weren't very careful about the animal byproducts. They didn't feed these chicken, they fed them meat byproducts, which may include beef. So really, it was cannibalistic cows. And it's thought that that's where the prions came from, that it has something to do with that. Because Kuru is a disease that's found in the South Pacific, again, fairly rare, and pretty much gone away now. But it was found amongst cannibalistic tribes. So it's got something to do with cannibalism. I don't know about Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease, but it is an infection with prions of the central nervous system. So prions are not a big deal. They are a big deal if you have a prion infection, but it's not something that you're going to see in practice. It's mostly a talking point for when the news is full of mad cow disease. Viruses, on the other hand, we will see a lot of. And what all viruses are is a little protein coat with a piece of DNA or RNA in it. Um, they, again, it's debatable. Are these things living organisms? They don't really metabolize, but they do reproduce and they do have action. Um, they cause infections. Um, Something about viruses is we think of viruses as infecting us, but viruses can infect any organism. Plants get viruses. As a matter of fact, the first virus identified ever was the tobacco mosaic virus, uh, which affected tobacco plants. So any living organism can get viruses, and it may surprise you that Bacteria can get viral infections. You know, what viruses do is they go into living cells and they hijack the protein synthesis um, mechanisms. They what they do is they take over transcription and translation, and they use the transcription. They have enzymes. They create enzymes that cause, instead of transcribing um, messenger RNA off the DNA, what happens is the transcription processes transcribes the viral DNA or RNA into making copies. It actually replicates that DNA and RNA, and that's how that gets replicated, and then uh, it moves this DNA and RNA to the ribosomes, and then uses the transfer RNA to plug in and make new protein coats for uh, each particular um, piece of viral nucleic material. Um, so the viruses then reproduce very efficiently by using the cell's own natural ability to make proteins. When the host cell is completely full of viruses, the cells rupture, and then all these copies of the virus end up in the interstitial fluid, where they enter adjacent cells and do it again. Um, Now, most viruses are not long lived outside of the host. They will rapidly just deteriorate, but some of them uh, are quite stable, uh, and in the host. So, depending on what cells the virus enters, the we can have a tough time getting rid of them. Some viruses go into neurons, and we can't actually kill the neurons to get rid of them, and so they end up staying in our body. So things like herpes, and we'll see that in a minute, or the uh, hepatitis, those sorts of things, those viruses can stay with us a long, long time. Um, uh, Herpes zoster, shingles, um, is in your body for years before it manifests. Bacteria are fairly straightforward. They are um, single cell microorganisms. They actually have metabolism and that kind of thing. So they are living creatures, but they're single cell. Uh, they can live outside the host. As a matter of fact, most of them live outside of hosts. Um, they say that there are billions of bacteria in every gram of soil. There's more bacteria in a shovelful of dirt than there are people on the earth. Bacteria are easily the most common organism on earth, um, or the most common class of organism on earth. Some of them are beneficial to us, and we need them. Then that's the normal flora and fauna of our guts. Um, we need them on our skin. We need them. They really um, uh, add to homeostasis. Um, there's there are some researchers that think that um, that the biosphere, the bacteria that are in us and on us, should constitute another organ system, because without them we can't have good health. Um, they there are more bacterial cells in you and on you right now than there are human cells. Uh, huge numbers. Some bacteria are pathogenic. They're pathogens. They can damage cells. They can release toxic waste. Sometimes the problem, like with botulism, for instance, the problem isn't the bacteria itself. The problem is the toxins that they secrete as part of their waste products. Um, some bacteria attack cells directly, um, but nevertheless, the mechanisms are unique to uh, each bacteria. The vast majority of bacteria in the world uh, are indifferent. They don't help us and they don't harm us. They just are in the environment. Um, the whole point of antibiotics is to slow down the reproduction of bacteria, um, and these things, for the most part, live in the interstitial fluid, where macrophages will eat them if they don't belong there. So um, some bacteria have more than just a cell membrane. They have a what's called a spore. A It's a wax coat that makes them very stable in the external environment for a long time. Like anthrax, for instance, will have a spore, and it can stay very stable for a long time until it gets brought into a host, and then it's released from the spore and becomes active bacteria. Um, we have a problem right now in that what we are doing is we're breeding superbacteria. Bacterial generations don't take very long. Um, Matter of hours, they fission and they change. Uh, so one of the things that we're doing with our widespread use of antibiotics and antiseptics is we kill a lot of bacteria. When you use Lysol wipes and they're killing 99.9% of bacteria on a surface, they do that. But that 0.1% of the bacteria that are left are the strongest bacteria, and they're the ones that reproduce. So then in the next generation, all of the bacteria there will be the offspring of that 0.1% that didn't die. So then you do it again and you kill off 99.9% of the weakest ones of those, and the 0.1 that survive are the strongest. And it doesn't take very long until what you've done is you've created superbacteria that are very difficult to kill. This first came to note during the Vietnam War in the late 60s and the early 70s, because what was happening was the U.S. military didn't give the hookers in Saigon any access to penicillin, and so they would get gonorrhea and really had no way uh, of curing it. It was very difficult for them to get penicillin. So when they got penicillin, what they would do is share it. Basically, they wouldn't take it for the whole course. They would take it just enough to get rid of the symptoms of the gonorrhea, and um, and the dose for one might work for 3 or 4 incidents of it. So what was happening was they were killing all the weak bacteria and they were breeding penicillin resistant strains of gonorrhea. And then what happened was those 19 and 20-year-old boys would come back from Vietnam, back to Michigan or wherever, and they would give these strains of gonorrhea to their girlfriends. And so um, it seems that ever since then, we've been kind of just one step ahead of the bacteria. We developed new antibiotics just slightly faster than strains of these bacteria become resistant to them. Uh, it's a major problem. The World Health Organization right now says that antibiotic resistant bacteria is a leading health threat in the world right now. There's different types of bacteria, and I know that you've seen these words before, but this is a nice way of looking at it. A cocci means that it's spherical. If it's a diplococci, there's two cocci joined together. If it's a staphylococci, just think of a staff, a group, like the teaching staff or something. So staphylococci are are found in a group. Streptococci are found in a stripe. So we'll look at some pictures here. So these are diplococci. There's two you can see here and here. Um, the two. See the little groups? That makes that staphylococci. Like I say, the streptococci uh, are found in stripes. They're usually associated with systemic infections. A bacilli is kind of a rod shape. Uh, so, uh, and they get named bacilli. Um, Spirochetes, they look like little corkscrews. The bacteria twists around. Then there's really only two of them that matter. One gives us syphilis, and the other one is Lyme disease, and we'll be talking about Lyme disease in one of the following videos. Mycoplasm are very small types of bacteria. So this group here is a streptococcus, and you can see why it's called that, because they are found in little chains. They look like a stripe. Where the little corkscrew guys, are spirochetes. Now, fungi are yeasts and molds, and we get yeast infections. We get fungal infections on our skin. Internally, we get them, yeast infections. You've heard of Candida uh, infections, Candida albicans, and stuff like that. Um, so fungi are a different class. They're probably closer to plants than they are to animals. But it's yeasts. Generally speaking, we get fungal infections when there is an imbalance, usually not enough bacteria. One of the things that they worry about is the overuse of antibiotics, uh, like antibiotic soaps, even. Antibacterial soaps can kill the natural bacteria of the skin, and basically the yeasts move in. Um, Again, it's something you have to be aware of. A lot of soaps change the pH of skin, make it inhospitable for the bacteria, but perfectly fine for yeast. So um, these are things that you have to be aware of. Now, the animal parasites are multicellular. They could be single cell. Um, they can live in the host. They can live on the host. Basically, they can almost just be feeding off you, eating you. So there are things like protozoa, which protozoa, almost animals. These would be things like giardia. You've probably heard of beaver fever. Um, Amoebas, amoebic dysentery is caused by a protozoan. We can have worms. We can have worms in our digestive tract, roundworms, tapeworms. We can have flukes and helminths within our tissue. There will be flukes that will live in our liver, um, things like that. We tend to not have a lot of parasitic infections in middle class Canada, but nevertheless, you can be exposed, especially if you've been doing some traveling. The arthropods are really insects, so that would be lice um, and mites. So the last kind of group are ones that don't hang around. They don't live on you. They just land on you and drink blood. So that would be things like mosquitoes and ticks, fleas. Now, the big worry about them is because they go from host to host, they can actually carry disease. They can carry bacteria. When they bite you, they tend to inject a little saliva into where they've bitten you, and what they do that stops coagulation, so the blood flows a little bit more freely. Uh, but if there are spirochetes, say, in the saliva, you can get a spirochetic infection. So Lyme disease is spread by ticks. Bubonic plague is uh, spread by fleas. Um, you know, malaria is spread by mosquitoes, etc. So this is a photograph of Giardia. It's a protozoa, lives in pond water, lives in dirty water, lake water. Um, and you all know what that is, even though we've come to the end of summer. This is a tick. Um, this is a tick before it's bitten you. Uh, it can get to be the size of a dime after it's fed on blood. Uh, they they can be quite nasty. One of the big problems with ticks is that if you um, just try and pull them off, the head separates from the body, and they burrow their head under your skin. So you would leave that, and you can end up with an infection from that. You have to be very careful in removing ticks. There's the internet is full of instructions on how to remove ticks. This is a mite, very much enlarged. They can be microscopic. Some mites eat dead skin, dead keratinocytes. They're called dust mites. They're hugely important. If it wasn't for mites, we'd be up to our butts in dead skin. They clean that up. They eat the keratin. There are some mites that will burrow actually under your skin and eat your skin while it's still on you, and they're called scabies. Um, so scabies infections is not what you really want. Uh, oh, and we've already seen this one. So that's a quick summary of the different types of infectious agents.